Hello everyone, in this video I am going to explain you the concept of man-in-the-middle attack in Diffie-Hellman key exchange algorithm and its examples. In case of Diffie-Hellman key exchange algorithm, there are two users, Alice and second one is Bob, and they are creating a shared symmetric key between each other. But in case of man-in-the-middle attack, there is one attacker who can intercept the request between this Alice and Bob. That's why it is called as man-in-the-middle attack. So in case of man-in-the-middle attack, Alice will calculate the value of R1, that is g raised to x mod p. So x is the number that is the private key of Alice. In case of Bob's side, y is the number that is the private key of Bob. And whenever Eve wants to create a shared secret key between this Alice and Eve and this Eve and Bob, that time they are choosing the value Z as a private key. So in case of Alice, Eve and Bob, they are creating X, Y and Z. These are the private keys of their own number. Suppose Alice will calculate the value of R1 is equal to g raised to x mod p. And in case of Bob's side, they will calculate R3 is equal to g raised to y mod p. In case of Eve's side, Eve will calculate the value of R2 is equal to g raised to z mod p. The value of g and p, these are the public numbers that are already given in the example. Whenever you will calculate the value of R2, that time they are sending the value of R2 to both the senders and receiver. Whenever Alice will calculate the value of R1, this value of R1 will be sent to the Bob. But Eve will intercept that request, and on the same Bob side, Bob is also sending the value of R3 to Alice. But this request will be intercepted by this Eve user. And they are calculating this number, that is R2 is equal to g raised to z mod p. And that value will be sent to both Alice and Bob. So whenever R2 will be received by this Alice and Bob, that time he knows that this value will be coming from, Alice will knows that this value will be coming from the Bob, and Bob will knows that this value will be coming from Alice. So in between, the middleman Eve will send that message, that is R2 value, to both Alice and Bob. That's the role of this man-in-the-middle attack. Once R2 value will be received by Alice, that time he is calculating the value of K1 is equal to R2 raised to x mod p. This is on the Alice side. K1 will be calculated. And on the Bob side, value of K2 will be calculated, that is R2 raised to y mod p. So this x and y, these are the private keys of Alice and Bob. On the Eve side, they will calculate the value of K1 and they will calculate the value of K2, that is K1 is equal to R1 raised to Z, that is private key of Eve mod P, as well as they will calculate R3 raised to Z mod P. So this R1 and R3 will be intercepted by this Eve in this step. Now next one. Now we have to calculate the key between Alice and Eve and Bob. So value of K1 is equal to g raised to xz mod p. So x and z, these are the private key of Alice and Eve. And in case of K2, we are calculating the key between Eve and Bob. So K2 is equal to g raised to z by mod p. So g raised to z by, that is z by These are the private keys of U and Bob. So now we have calculated the symmetric key between Alice and U, that is K1, and symmetric key between U and Bob, that is K2. Now let's begin with the examples. In the given example, value of P and G is given. The private keys of Alice, Bob and Use are given, that is X, Y and Z. And based on the given value, we have to calculate the symmetric share key between Alice and Eve, that is K1, and Eve and Bob, that is K2. So in the first step, we will calculate the value of R1, that is G raised to X mod P. So R1 is equal to G raised to X mod P is equal to 7 raised to 2 mod 11, and we got the value 5. In the second step, we will calculate the value of R3 is equal to G raised to Y mod P, and this value will be calculated by Bob. So 7 raised to 3 mod 11, we got the value 2. In the third step, we will calculate the value of R2 on the U side, and we will get the value G raised to Z mod P is equal to 7 raised to 5 mod 11, and value is equal to 10. So now we have calculated the value of R1, value of R3 and value of R2. After calculating the value of R1, this value will be sent from Alice to Bob. But Eve will intercept this request and they will send the value of R2 to Alice. Once Bob will calculate the value of R3, this value will be sent from Bob to Alice. But Eve will capture that request and they will intercept that request and they will send the value of R2 to Bob. So value of R2 will be sent to both Alice as well as Bob. So attacker will send the number, that is public key number of their Eve, to both the users Alice and Bob. But they will knows that the request will be comes from Alice will knows that the value will be comes from Bob, and Bob will knows that the value will be comes from Alice. So both the users will assume that the request will be coming from the victim, but the request will be coming from this attacker. So now in the fourth step, Alice will calculate the value of K1. So K1 is equal to R2 raised to X mod P. So our value of R2 is equal to 10 raised to X is equal to 2 mod 11. After calculation, we will get the value is equal to 1. In the fifth step, the value of K2 will be calculated by Bob. So K2 is equal to R2 raised to Y mod P. So K2 is equal to R2 raised to Y mod P. So 10 raised to 2, value of Y is equal to 3. So we are taking 10 raised to 3 mod 11, and we got the value 10. So here we have calculated the value of K1 as well as K2, and we are taking here value of R2. So R2 is the public key for our Eve, that is our attacker. But Alice and Bob will assume that the value will be coming from the party, that is Alice will assume that this value will be coming from Bob, and Bob will assume that this value will be coming from Alice. Now we have to calculate the value of our Alice and Eve key, that is K1, Eve and Bob key, that is K2. So in the seventh step, K1 is equal to G raised to XZ mod P. So this X and Z, these are the private keys of Eve and Alice. So 7 raised to 2 into 5 mod 11. So 7 raised to 10 mod 11, we got the value 1. And our K2 is equal to G raised to Z by mod P. So K2 is the key between Eve and Bob. So 7 raised to 5 into 3 mod 11. So 7 raised to 15 mod 11, we got the value 10. So now we have calculated these values of K1 and value of K2. So we got the value of K1 is equal to 1, K2 is equal to 10. So that is your shear symmetric key between Alice and Eve, Eve and Bob. So once we got the value of our K1 and K2, then we have calculated our shear symmetric key between our attacker and the user. So that is called as man in the middle attack. So we have solved the examples of man in the middle attack in Diffie-Hellman key exchange algorithm.